Fred and Alice McPherson were born at the dawn of the 20th century, and they didn't have any biological children, but they were a third set of grandparents for me. Now, when you look at this picture, I'm sure your eyes immediately gravitate to that amazing set of plaid pants and wonder, how did Wes ever lose that style? But when I see this picture, I am flooded with a wealth of memories, like learning to eat vine-ripened tomatoes and how wonderful they are with lemon pepper. Thinking of fried eggs and bacon that always have to have Tabasco sauce on them, and at probably the age of 9, being entrusted for the first time to earn a pocket knife. And it was a buck knife, and I still have it, and I wore it to the scout campout last weekend, and I thought of them. Well, Fred was a remarkable man. Alice was too, but I want to talk a little bit about Fred today, and he was born in 1911. And he was a self-educated man. He only completed education through the 11th grade, but he, over the course of his lifetime, was always a tinkerer and was always someone who played with technology and enabled folks in his community to connect with technology. And he ended up working at a place called Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which in the 1940s was where the United States refined uranium, and he was part of a project called the Manhattan Project. My grandfather, my biological grandfather on my mom's side, was as well. And Fred was a maintenance, a building supervisor for the Manhattan Project in the secret city, and eventually took his skills that he had in radio and technology to own a hardware store in Itasca, Texas, and bring air conditioning and refrigeration and washers and dryers and all kinds of things to families, and retired a millionaire. Well, what I'd like to do is share a little audio clip with you, because my parents fortunately had the foresight in 2005, 3 years before Fred passed away, to take a digital audio recorder and to ask Fred to tell them about his life. And so in 2008, after Fred had passed away, my parents, who live in Kansas, drove down I-35 and picked me up in Oklahoma City, and my sister was there, and we drove down I-35 to Itasca, which is just south of Fort Worth, just north of Hillsboro, and my parents put the CD in the car, inside the stereo, and Fred was there with us in the car. And there were all kinds of memories that we each had. My mom grew up going to Itasca and spending summers there as well. And so I'm just going to share a brief clip, but I need to tell you a little bit about some of the history, because Fred is going to tell you about radios. And I want you to think about how far we've come with technology since the early 1920s, when crystal radio receivers were the first radios that people could not only buy, but could make. And Fred took them apart and learned how to make these. Now, Fred's also going to talk about a 2-tube radio. And this was big time, because in the valley the valley in Texas, in South Texas, on a clear night, if the weather conditions were right and you were lucky, you could not only hear radio stations in Nebraska, but you could hear them in Pennsylvania, and you could even hear them in Los Angeles. So, thanks to the magic of digital recording, we're going to listen to just a little 90-second clip and listen to Fred share some memories about growing up and playing with radios.
Fort Worth, or
when I first heard one.
yeah, got your first radio and all.
Well, back in the first radio was a crystal receiver, but believe it or not, I could you could hear KFKX in Hastings, Nebraska, and KDKA in Pittsburgh, if you waited late enough at night. And then, if you waited real late, and you were lucky, you'd hear KFI Los Angeles.
Did you build a crystal set, or did somebody you know have one?
Well,
like, was it a kit, or
I bought one.
already put together?
I bought one, and then I got to making them. I got to making sets. And then I got...
And sell them? Did you sell them?
We graduated to a Crosley 2-tube set. Boy, we was uptown. And then old inquisitive me, I unscrewed the earpiece and put it on the bottom of a tin bucket and made a loudspeaker out of it. And you could hear it all over the room.
Oh, well.
Oh, boy.
Oh.
What would Fred say about the iPhone 5 in my pocket today? You know, not only able to receive, but also publish and share a variety of media, not just audio, but video as well. I want to challenge you today to think about becoming a digital witness for your family. We all witness different things, but we don't always record them. And sometimes we don't always want to record them. And we've probably heard plenty of stories and read things in the newspaper and seen on television about things people wish they hadn't recorded. Well, today I want you to think about things that you wish you had recorded but can't, and take motivation from those to think about the things you can record and share today. Because it truly is magical to be able to record the voices of people in our families and in our communities. And today, many of you came into this auditorium with a device in your pocket or your purse that has that capability to be able to record. Now, I know many of you as Oklahomans will be relieved to know that my family immigrated from the Republic of Texas 7.5 years ago, and we got here to Oklahoma City as fast as we could. And I started working with a group of educators on a project called Celebrate Oklahoma Voices. And over that time, since the end of 2006, we have worked with many teachers and students, primarily teachers, doing workshops for them, with them, to help them learn to create digital stories. And these are narrated slideshows. So many of these are audio recordings that they have put to some pictures. And there are over 960 of those that you can find on the website Celebrate Oklahoma Voices today. Now, as you might possibly expect, there are a number of veteran videos here. And by a show of hands, do we have any veterans in the audience today? Anyone who's served in the U.S. military in the past? Anyone who's active duty? So we celebrate Veterans Day in our country every November. But it's really, really important to remember that veterans have sacrificed and continue to sacrifice, as well as their families, for our country. And if you don't have a relative or a family member or a child in your class or a neighbor who is serving now, you might forget that we've been at war in this country for over a decade and we're still at war. And the sacrifices that our veterans make are very important. So those are some really important stories that are here. And I think that probably Tom Brokaw and Tom Hanks, in the books and the movies that they've made, have done a great service to our country. Because we've had multiple situations where a child of a grandparent will say, when their child interviews grandfather, he never told me that story. He never talked about the war before. Because I think what Brokaw and Hanks and others did is they've given permission to a generation of Americans who made huge sacrifices to tell their story. And so some of those stories are preserved here. As you might expect, we have stories about the Dust Bowl. How many of you have seen part of Ken Burns' new series that just came out in November about the Dust Bowl? It's a wonderful documentary. But I would say that the short, about 5-minute documentary that Jeanette Hale, who grew up in the Oklahoma Panhandle, created in 2008 about her grandmother who turned 90 the week she made this video. Jeanette actually called her on the phone and had a family member there, and they recorded the phone call to get her voice telling the stories. Is every bit as poignant and powerful as many of the stories you'll hear in Ken Burns' documentary. In fact, one of my favorite parts of that story is when Jeanette's grandmother talks about how they had to leave their eyes closed in the mornings before when they woke up for the first time, and their mom would wipe with a wet washcloth the dust from their eyes so it wouldn't get in their eyes. Those kinds of details matter. And we've heard today in some presentations about how important it is to preserve details and to get details. And so oral history and being a digital witness gives you that chance. We live in Tornado Alley, do we not? And even though weather patterns seem to be changing, and I saw a map actually before we moved to Oklahoma, it was a National Geographic map, and it plotted all of the tornadoes that F5 down to F1, you know, that have been the last, whatever, century in the United States. And do you all know what Oklahoma looks like on that map? You really can't see us. And I thought, whoa, who would live here? But you know, moving here to our wonderful state, which our family loves, we're proud to call ourselves Okies, has some incredible technology to track tornadoes. But that is not the story of a storm. The story of a storm is caught up in the human experiences that happen. And so one of the storm stories we have is about the 1928 tornado that hit Blair. And what brings this story to life is not the statistic, 2 people were killed. It's the fact that the teller, the mother, late in life, recalling what happened, talks about her friend's daddy and her friend's mom. And the ability to connect events in a very personal and in sometimes an emotional way is a really important way to learn. How long have folks been telling stories? Well, pretty much since the cave. How does every major faith and religion pass on its essential tenets? Through stories. How do we tend to teach U.S. history in the high schools of Oklahoma? Well, sometimes it's through stories. And I'll argue that we need to be using stories much more, not only in the social sciences, but in many other fields. And being a digital witness and being a digital storyteller gives us an opportunity to do that. We live in a remarkably diverse state. And if I'm correct, I think we have federally recognized 36 sovereign nations that call Oklahoma home. And we do have some stories within the archive now that are celebrating the language and the history and the traditions and the cultures of the diverse nations which live within our state. And this is a video that Janet Ballou created about the Cherokee language, which she's using to share with her students. She's a music teacher in Oklahoma. Here's one of my favorites. I'm doing some work now in Yukon, Oklahoma as an instructional coach with teachers. And I'd never heard of Grady the cow. Have you? Well, in 1949, Grady was national news because she got her head stuck in a grain silo. And people all over the country were riveted to their radios, probably at the time, wondering how Grady was going to get out and get free. And so this story is preserved in a wonderful Yukon, Oklahoma accent that is just, it's wonderful. It's a great story, and it's something that one of my dreams is to create an app or to help contribute to an app where we can push a button and say, I wonder what the stories are in this neighborhood. If these walls could talk and this building could tell me a story, what would it say? And if we're there at your house, what did your great-grandmother have to say about moving here to Oklahoma or working down the street at the corner drugstore when she was growing up? One more story I'll tell you about, and then I'm going to play a quick one for you. This one is called The Silver Spoon, and it's a story that was created by one of our Oklahoma A+ school leaders about her father, who was a World War II Panzer driver. He was a tanker. And he tells the story of when he spent a night in a German house and ate some clabber with a silver spoon. And years later, he returned to that small German community. And because he had that silver spoon, it was a unifying memento that united him to the family, which had been in the basement the night he was there. And they had seen children in the shadows, and they had not, gone down to discharge their weapons, to shoot in the basement. And so it's a precious story that, he can tell so much better than anyone else. Why? Because he lived it, because he was the one who was there. And so we tend to probably think a lot about history when we would think about oral history and digital storytelling, oral history. But there are other reasons why stories like this are compelling. And the story I'd like to play for you as a video is called Lily and John. This is a love story. This is just 2.5 minutes long. And Karen Jo, who created this story, had wanted her family to see how significant this tale was. But it wasn't until she was able to put some pictures with the audio that many folks in her family really got it.
There was an undercurrent of tension at the wedding of James Otten and Leona Stribling on that August day in Garvin County, Indian Territory. Earlier, John's 13-year-old sister and Leona's 15-year-old brother announced they were in love and planned to marry. To prevent the marriage of Lily Lee and John, the Otten family moved from Garvin County and settled in the community of Hart, Pontotoc County, Indian Territory. The Ottens were a proud family. There would be no hint of scandal or disgrace. 7 years later, when Lily Lee Otten was at the ripe old age of 20, she married another man, John Cohee Kitchens. Together they had 7 children and moved to California during the Great Depression. There, in 1954, John Cohee Kitchens died. On a visit with her oldest son, who had returned to Oklahoma, Lily Lee once again found her first love, John Stribling. He lived on the same farm that he had in 1900. He too had married and raised a family. His spouse had also died. They began to correspond and renew an old love. At the ripe age of 72, my grandma, Lily Lee Otten Kitchens, married John Stribling, now 75. They were married for over 20 years when she died of a stroke. When she died, she said hello 5 times, once for each child who had passed away before her and her first husband. But she never again said goodbye to John Stribling.
Yeah, I think that's worth applause. So it's amazing what we can do with media and how powerful the spoken word is and how powerful storytelling can be, particularly when we combine it at times with some audio and even with some music. We're familiar with a lot of different apps and devices today, and I want you to look at those devices perhaps in a different way, because there are many apps that you can use to record, and for $25 to $50 you can get a digital audio recorder and start becoming a digital witness in your family. There's also apps that you can do this on the iPad and other devices. What would it look like in Oklahoma if every single family had an archive of oral history? We're familiar with storm chasers, right? And this is the Discovery Channel's vehicle. Mine cars do not look like this, but storm chasers go and they chase the story. They cross state lines, they go where the story is. And my challenge to you is to be a digital witness, to be a story chaser for your family. And in the spirit of TEDxOU, as I exhort you to be a digital storyteller, live on and prosper.